So if you want to achieve Atma, realize Atma, get to Atmajnan, how do you do it? With four things: Satya, Tapasya, Brahmacharya, and Samyak Jnana. And a continuous application of these four, if you do it, you will get the Atmadarshan. What is demanded in what we call modern science, actually Bhagavad Puran is even demanding more. In science, we'll say explanation, the triangulation of explanation, prediction, testing is enough. Bhagavad is saying it's not enough. It says, Shruti Pratyaksham Aitiyam Anumanam Chatushtayam Pramaneshva Anavasthanat Vikalpat Savirajyate. If you don't do quadrangulation of Shruti, Pratyaksha, Aitiya, and Anuman, it's not, unless you do the quadrangulation of these four, it's not sufficient. So this is our framework, okay? So why? Because to know Atmajnan, Brahmajnan, how? Through Satya, Tapasya, Brahmacharya, and Samyak Jnana. Where does that fit? It fits into investigation, but it also fits into communication. Namaskar to everyone. Hope everyone is safe and maintaining social distancing. So this also gives us an opportunity to try different technologies here. So we are doing Sangam talks in person. Now this is through media, or this is through internet. So scientific acumen in Puranas and Upanishads. There are many insights that you will see in our ancient Indian narratives. And what we like to typically think of anytime we hear Puranas, we think these are stories. Mostly it has to do with rituals or bhakti, and maybe there is some information thrown here and there, but there is a lot of deep information about science. And I have given a few other talks on how dharma essentially means science as religion, so I'm not going to go into that. And my request to all of you, at the end of this, when we get into question and answer session, or as you type your questions, please limit your questions as much as possible to what is being discussed today, and not very generic, everything about Hinduism, India, and whatnot. Okay, so with that preamble, let's get to why. So, for example, why do we do science, or why study Upanishad, or why read Puran? Anything, why study, why contemplate, why think? And this can be shown. So I'm going to begin with one verse from a Mundak Upanishad, and I will end my presentation with exactly this same verse. Okay, this is in Mundak Upanishad. It says, Satyena labhyas tapasa yesha atma samyak jnanena brahmacharyena nityam antah sharire jyotir mayo hi shubro yam paschanti yataya kshina dosha. Now, someone would say, where is the science in this, or what does this verse say? I mean, it's in Sanskrit, right? What this verse is saying is, if you want to know Brahma, if you want to know Atma, if you want to know Brahma, if you want to know Atmajnan, if you want to know Brahmajnan, this is how you do it. So why Brahmajnan, why Atmajnan is not given here. That one has to come to this level, okay? That's that curiosity. And therefore, if you look at our Shad Darshanas, or say, look at Mimamsa, Purva Mimamsa, Uttar Mimamsa, it begins with Athato Dharma Jidnyasa, or Athato Brahma Jidnyasa. Now that you have developed a curiosity to know about Dharma, or now that you have developed a curiosity to know about Brahma, here is what you need to do. So that why is, if you want to know Atma, if you want to know Brahma, that is the reason why you would do this. Okay. Now we will talk about what Brahma is in a minute, and how to do it. That is been given by this verse from Mundak Upanishad. It says, Satyena labhyas tapasa yesha atma. So if you want to achieve Atma, realize Atma, get to Atmajnan, how do you do it? With four things: Satya, Tapasya, Brahmacharya, and Samyak Jnana. And a continuous application of these four, if you do it, you will get the Atmadarshan. And who gets this Atmadarshan? It says, Yam Paschanti Yataya Kshina Dosha. Those Yati, who have minimized, almost eliminated their dosha. Okay, so that what is the next circle, and what means actually what are the different things that we have to do, and what is the outcome. Okay, so in this case, one of the outcome, at least we notice, is that their defects are minimized, are almost eliminated. The word is very, very scientific. It doesn't say elimination of a dosha, it says kshina dosha. It has minimized. So this is our framework. Okay, so why? Because to know Atmadnyan, Brahmadnyan, how? Through Satya, Tapasya, Brahmacharya, and Samyak Jnana. And what? We are going to elaborate on this. Now, in this same Mundak Upanishad, you get additional insights. For example, as to how, it says Nacha Pramada Tapaso Vapyalinga. Okay, so you can be very careless or casual about what you do. So you might do tapasya, you might put a lot of hard work, effort, but if you are careless, if you are casual, you are not going to get the desired outcome. And alingat, meaning you cannot have a unscientific attitude. You have to have a framework. You must define your framework, how you are exploring something. You cannot just explore in a wayward way. It's just not going to work. So if we have to take, and there are a couple other verses I'm going to quote from the same Upanishad, and I'll not read those, but I'll give you a quick translation of it. Notice the words like Jnana Trupta, Krutatmana, Vitaraga, Prashanta, Prapyadhira. This is the outcome. I mean, this is proof is in the pudding. This is the outcome. Just from my practical experience, I'll tell you the alingat, I said, like without a framework. Now, this is a challenge in my specific limited work that I do on a chronology. For last 10 years, I know, just I'll take simply Mahabharata or Ramayana. I mean, that's what I work on. And I ask other researchers working on the same subject, like, what is your framework? What is your theory? And 10 plus years, I'll tell you guys, I don't have an answer from not even a single other individual as to what their theory is. Okay, because that's the framework that we need to explore anything. Now, what are the lessons learned here? One is increasing signal to noise ratio. The perfection is desired, but it may not be attainable, and it's not always required. But you aim for perfection. But kshina dosha, a minimization of errors, minimization of dosha will do. Okay, it may still allow you to achieve the objective. Mere hard work is frivolous. Like just the tapasya by itself is not going to do it. And so avoid being casual, careless, and also avoid being unscientific. You must explain what is your framework if you're doing something. All right, just a quick translation. Take a minute. I'm just going to leave the slide, not read through those. This is very crude translation. So take 30 seconds, read the translation in English. The one point that I will just mention is the word brahmacharya. Like brahmacharya, immediately what comes to our mind is celibacy, and that's correct. But brahmacharya has much bigger meaning. In fact, celibacy is just one practical aspect of it, or a controlling of the senses, not just even celibacy. Because someone can be married and still a brahmachari. Okay, I'll encourage you to read Puranas for that. Again, by the way, the objective I have behind this presentation is not to give all the details. I mean, that just cannot be done in 40-45 minutes. But if I can, because of this, if some of you are inspired to go back to the Puranas, I'm going to use one specific Puran in this talk, which is Bhagavad Puran. But if it encourages you to also start studying Upanishad, and Bhagavad Gita is the best Upanishad, you can begin there and then can refer to other Upanishad, then I would consider this attempt of mine as a worthy attempt. So that brahmacharya, just quickly, is to be understood in this context or in many contexts as study, as contemplation, and as thinking. Now, in order to do this, you need to have a right state of mind, you need to have right circumstances, and that's when possibly, the aspect of celibacy is introduced. but study, contemplation, thinking is equal to brahmacharya, as per as at least for this session, which is universally true, by the way. All right. So that's why. Now there is some element of why that we need to explain, and I'm going to explain that in the how. For example, now somebody is going to ask, okay, fine. So why? To understand Brahma Jnana or Atma Jnana, and how? By using these 4 elements. But what do I do? I mean, satya of what? Okay, study of what, and contemplation of what, and thinking of what? I mean, that's the question. And I'm going to tell you this wonderful story from Taittiriya Upanishad, another Upanishad. And the story, or the philosophy, if you want to call it, goes by the name Bhargavi Varuni Vidya. A number of you may be knowing this, and that's great if you already know this. So Bhrigu goes to his father Varun and asks him, so this is a student-teacher relationship, a research student, professor, guide relationship. In this case, it happens to be a son and a father. Okay, so Bhrigu is going to his father Varun and asking his father, tell me what is Brahma? Now that is the kind of questions I get all the time, not as a father, but people will say, just please tell me, or Nilesh, please work on this, or please research on this, as if, and these people really feel that they are doing a great help to me, or help to humankind, or help to dharma and whatnot. Well, that's not how it works. For example, in this case, Bhrigu as a student is very genuinely approaching Varun and asking, tell me what is Brahma. The problem is, even if Varun would have told him what Brahma is, Bhrigu would not have accepted it. Whatever may be the reason, but do you know what Varun told Bhrigu? He said, great question, go do tapasya. So Bhrigu goes, does a lot of tapasya, hard work, and comes back with this realization. What is his question? What is Brahma? He comes back with this realization and says that Annam Brahmeti Vijana. So he comes back to Varun and says, okay, this is what I understood. Annam Brahmeti Vijana. And I'm not going to elaborate on this. Again, my goal is to titillate your senses and a desire to study this in detail. But I can tell you the story how he reached that realization. And then now he asked Varun, so now, father, tell me what is Brahma. So he has certain understanding, he has put efforts, he has understanding, and now he asks again. And now Varun says, well, great question, go do tapasya. So Bhrigu goes back, does tapasya, and comes back with another realization. He says, Prano Brahmeti Vijana. Now I understood that Prana is Brahma. Okay, now this goes on. I'm going to go fast through this. Again, just repeat. You can say the do loop in programming language. Mano Brahmeti Vijana. He comes back, again asks Varuna. Varuna says, go back and do more tapasya. He does that, comes back with another realization, Vijnana Brahmeti Vijana. Again, it's repeated, and he comes back with the realization, Ananda Brahmeti Vijana. Now, many of you know that these are the different koshas, in our individual self. We say Anna Kosh, Prana Kosh, Mana Kosh, Vijnan Kosh, and the inner Atma, Ananda Kosh, and so on. A few points I want to make. One is like, if you read the story, when I read the story a long time ago, and I found this to be extremely like childlike, and I'm using the word carefully. I didn't necessarily think it's a childish. Maybe I would have thought of it as a childish then. I said, what is this? I mean, Upanishad is something great. I went to read this, and this is how they spent time. Actually, a significant portion is spent in Taittiriya Upanishad telling the story. So what's going on? But, as you start studying, at least that's my experience. Like I'm reading right now Shankaracharya's book, it's right here, but I'll not go into that. And the Sanskrit sometimes makes you feel separated, but you also realize if you read the translation or if you translate it yourself, Shankaracharya is talking to you like a child, I mean, he has that a fresh sense of being a child, but treating you as a child too, but not childish, it's childlike. And then you will see the references in Upanishad to that effect also. For example, a bit of a digression, but he says Tasmad Brahmana, the person who is a knowledgeable, what he needs to do is Pandityam Nirvidya Ballena Tishtased. He or she must able to digest that erudition, the Panditya, and behave like a child, So you see that. But what is wonderful about this story, about this Bhargavi Varuni Vidya, and I'm going to take that as a couple of takeaways for us as we go further. So people will now ask, so okay, Brahmadhyana I understood. I understand the 4 elements that I can use how to know about Brahma. But so Satya of what? And what should I think about? And what should I contemplate about? And the answer is the Satya of anything that fascinates you. Okay, it's a search of anything that fascinates you. And then if you look at Vachaspati Mishra's commentary on called Bhamati, on a Brahma Sutra, he talks about 2 aspects. That anything sounds like, anyone can do their own thing. Not quite. Okay, so Satya of anything is fine, but it has to be Saprayojana and Sandigdha. You have to select the subject for your study, subject for your investigation, in such a way that if you do find the answer, or if you do find some insights, some new insights, it should lead to something fruitful. Okay, for example, Satya, as in like a factually true. I mean, I'm looking through the window of my house here, and I may say, if you come out of my house on the right side, there is only 1 tree in my front yard, and we share the driveway. This is a small cul-de-sac here, and share the driveway with my Chinese neighbor. We are good friends, and they have a small tree. I mean, this is all factually true, but it's a trivial truth, that doesn't add any value. I am not interested in that kind of truth. I'm interested in the interesting truth. You should be interested in interesting truth. So it has to be Saprayojan, and it should also be Sandigdha, meaning when you ask a question or when you want to investigate something, it should be coming out of a genuine doubt. Many times when you object to something else, it is because to put it down, or it doesn't agree with either what you believe or doesn't agree with what your claim is, and so on. Not necessarily driven by the search for the truth. Okay, so think of this for our question answer session. When you ask a question, think of as a Saprayojan and Sandigdha. And then a couple other points quickly, which I am very confident you understood, which is the tapasya. Okay, there is nothing that is possible without tapasya. And just asking someone really doesn't help, because even if that person answers, like somebody asks me, when did Mahabharata war happen? I mean, I can give an answer in 1 word, right? 5561 BCE. Now, are you convinced? Not really. So which means you have to go do tapasya to be convinced of it on your own. Okay, and then the second important point, very important, is that the realization is gained in an iterative fashion. Okay, so the realization to Bhrigu that the Ananda, the ultimate one, for example, Ananda Brahmeti Vijnana, it did not come the first time. Okay, he has to go through the iterations to get there. Okay, so that's one aspect. The second aspect of that how is think of a life or anything that we do as a problem solving. Now, not problem solving in the sense of problem as a negative thing. You can think of this as an opportunity, challenge, whatever you want to call it. But that's actually true. The life is problem solving, okay, in a very joyful way, if you think. Most of us who are lucky enough to think of problem or problem solving in a joyful fashion. And this is my framework. I call it Ashtakaran Shakti, like 8-limbed, method to solve puzzles. The 3 corners are Vijnana Buddhi, Tantra Yukti, and Tarka Shastra. And then in the middle is what? 5 elements of the scientific method: the theory, evidence, objective testing, inference, background knowledge, or Prameya, Praman, Indriya, Pramanya, Anuman, Agama. Okay, this is all coming from our Shad Darshanas. Quickly, the point I want to mention about Tantra Yukti is what I already mentioned. How do you select a problem to solve? You want to select the problem in such a way that it is fruitful. It is something that people have not solved, or people are really finding it hard to solve. So, for example, like going back 1995, for me, it was Arundhati Vasishtha that I realized no one has solved. Or right now we have a problem of or challenge or interesting opportunity for creating a Indian calendar, a truly functional, useful, flexible, okay, Indian lunisolar calendar that can also incorporate other elements like say of a Gregorian calendar, so that it's very functional and it doesn't create problems for a practical, everyday vyapar, everyday life. Or we are stuck into the dogma of a yuga. Okay, these are the kind of very fruitful problems if somebody wants to work on them. I'm just giving as an example, and we'll talk about Vijnan Buddhi and Tarka Shastra on another slide. So that's all I have to say about the how aspect. So I mentioned search for the truth, but what kind of truth? We are not looking for a trivial truth. We are looking for interesting truths, which is saprayojana. If we find that truth, it leads to progress of knowledge. It leads to growth of knowledge. And then solve problems, but again, what kind? The same answer, the fruitful kind. And then the middle 5 elements, again, if you have listened to my talks, you have seen this like hundreds of times. You may be tired of seeing this. I'm never tired of showing this, because what happens is time and time again, any new thing comes and I say, somebody makes a claim and I said, please fill these 5 points for me. And then I never hear from them again. Okay. This particular framework, it's the logic of scientific method, logic of scientific discovery. It's very, very powerful. So if you look at the Western philosophy of science, Sir Karl Popper, I consider him as my guru, one of the gurus. He explains this very simply as what is science? He says the triangulation of explanation, prediction, testing, the middle 3, okay, the evidence and objective testing and inference, explanation, prediction, testing in the context of a theory, that is the conjecture, and in the context of a background knowledge. If you go to our Shad Darshanas and if you go to Gautama's, what is he going to say? I say it all the time, and to emphasize the point, by this time, number of you who have listened to the talks should have it by heart. Okay, so if it's Gautam, he's going to say Pratyaksha, it's right here. Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana, Shabda, Pramanani. So you can see those words. Now it doesn't mention Agama, it doesn't mention Prameya, but it's understood. It's there. If you go to Patanjali Yoga Sutra, it says Pratyaksha, Anumana, right? Agama, Pramanani. It doesn't use the word Upaman or Shabda and Prameya, but it's there. It is there in the Pratyaksha because you do the objective testing of the evidence and so on. I'll move fast through this. Now let's get to the what. 2 elements, those 2 corners. One was a Vijnana Buddhi, the other one was a Tarka Shastra. I'll start with the Tarka Shastra. In Upanishad, you will hear these words all the time, like many, many verses, every Upanishad. Andatama, Rashmi Prakasha, Vidya Avidya, Zaniva, Neniva, Sambhuti, Asambhuti. And then, the grammarians will fight on these words forever. Like Sambhuti, take Sambhuti from Ishavasya Upanishad and try to look for a meaning of it. And you can see the quarrels that are going on for at least 3,000 years. Okay, but we don't have to get stuck into grammar. Grammar is useful, but we don't have to get stuck. So let's call this Vidya Avidya. So logical reasoning, the Nyaya Darshan of Gautama, it talks of 16 elements, and it says if you are expert in these 16 elements, then it is you are expert now in a Tarka Shastra. So these, out of those 16, the first 10, and then I have 6 at the bottom. The first 10 are, think of this as a good thing. This is something you want to learn and you want to implement. The remaining 6 you want to learn so that you can detect anytime that element shows up. And you don't want to use it yourself. You want to stop others from using it. And if you find someone else using it, you have to rebuke that person. You have to bring it to his or her attention that they are doing this. Jalpa, Vitanda, Hitva, Bhasa, Chala, Jati, and then there are many occasions for Nigrahasthana, like rebuking and even removing the person from the debate and so on. That is discussion, because they are wasting time. For example, Vitanda, Swapratipaksha Sthapana Hina Vitanda. If someone is objecting to you, but they don't have an alternate claim of their own, they are doing Vitanda. It's unacceptable. But what happens if this knowledge is not there? And Sangam Talks, we had a wonderful debate with Dr. Manish. I mean, I had a debate with Manish Pandit. We had a good debate, both of us. I think that was a good start at least. But if the audience is not aware of these elements, audience may clap at anything or may not truly understand. The second aspect is the scientific acumen aspects. And again, our Shaddarshanas give 11 elements. I'm calling it 11 elements from one particular set, but you can call those 16, you can call those 10s, and that same thing true for these logical reasoning elements and so on. But the point here is the science or scientific investigation or investigation of any kind means you take something and you break it into pieces. You classify. So, you separate it, you extract Prathakkaran, you classify, you do Vargikaran. Okay, you might set the evidence in a distinctive fashion, like Taratamya, Mahatvamapan. You may sequence it, Anukram, there is a certain sequence in which one must test it or one must put forward the proposal. Sometimes you have to associate the evidence and so on and on. Indriya Pramanya, the objective testing. And then there are some elements, for example, how to avoid the confusion, Indriya Brahm, for example. Now the skepticism there, Samshay, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, is of a two kind. And the one that is explained here or mentioned here in scientific acumen, the Samshay, this is a Samshay of a Buddhi, like devil's advocate. And this is very, very, very much required, very much welcome. Okay. The point is you take you start with the investigation, you dissect the data, you analyze it, you do all kinds of things. At the end of it, it's very important that you bring it together. And this wonderful, this particular the element of scientific acumen or the process is wonderfully described by this one verse from Ishopanishad. It's a very small Upanishad, 18 verses. Okay, very, very small. I mean, number of you may have this by one heart. This is verse number 16. And so if you can see the picture, there is a picture of a sunrise. The sun is coming and now spreading his rays, his light in all direction. And then the time comes for a sunset, and as if it's now, taking all the rays and all the light and it's bringing it inside, it's unifying it together. So Vyuha, in fact, if you look at this verse, Pushan, Ekarushe, Yama, Surya, Prajapatya. Now the verse that I pulled from, wherever I pulled it from, the spacing is not correct. It's Pushan, Ekarushe, Yamasurya, Prajapatya, Vyuharashmin, Samuha. That's where it should stop. I'll not go into the detailed meaning of it. But the first two lines up to Samuha, essentially it's a prayer. Think of it's a prayer to Surya. Okay, Surya as in this case, something to pray to. And then it says, so that's a prayer. Now from the Teja, Yatte Rupam Kalyana Tamam. Now Surya is giving you the darshan. Okay. And then it says, Tatte Pashyami. So now I see it. And it says, then Ya Aso Purusha Sa Aham Asmi. So Aham Asmi, if you have seen this. And then you actually see yourself. Same with the Surya. Okay, I'll not go into the esoteric meaning of it. For the scientific acumen, what the point is, when the sun is rising, it's spreading its rays. Okay, to get the work done, it's spreading its rays, and as if at the end of the day, it is pulling all the rays back into it at a sunset, and that's a unification. That's samslation. Unification. Whereas Vyuha as in Chakra Vyuha or military formation, which is what? You don't put the army in one place. You make different formations. It's the same formations that I showed you on the previous page with the scientific acumen, that you may start with the extraction of the data, then you may do the separation of the data, classification of the data, different arrangements of it to test it, association and whatnot. Okay, so this is a good metaphor for that dissection, analysis, and then bringing it together. Okay. So quickly, if you go back to this Ashtakaran Kshipti, and now we are into the third part, which is what? How to do it, how to get the outcome, how to analyze the outcome, how to dissect the outcome, and how to communicate the outcome of the scientific investigation or investigation of any kind. In the center, what we are seeing is, again, those 5 elements: theory, evidence, objective testing, inference, and background knowledge. Just take a second and see if you agree with me. Out of those 5, the theory, like theorization, how do you come up with a theory? It's a mental process. Granted, it's based on the existing observations, the existing problems, the existing theories, and which observations they cannot explain, and so on. But it's a mental process. So is the inference, the drawing of a conclusion or inference, anuman. That's a mental process. And background knowledge that you use is also a mental process. And what it's something I would like to emphasize. Many people, they ask me what to that if they can work on something, then I give them a problem and then they run away. And I said, what's happening? I mean, this is happening for 10 plus years at least. And then I started realizing that they think it's a plug and play, and it is not plug and play. There's a lot of background knowledge that one ought to have in order to start getting these newer insights. Again, that background knowledge is also a mental process. To just give you a simple example, when I teach my daughter, since she's studying here in America, in India we had this pade. Marathi is a pade. I don't know what people call in other languages, the multiplication tables, big tables that we have by heart. Here, for some reason, they don't teach it like this. They teach it as a small multiplication cards, individual cards. 7 times 3 is something, and so on and so forth. And I just couldn't get my head around that particular thing. And so when I'm teaching her something and we are solving issues, she will go to the calculator. Before she can finish it, I would have done the math. And she says, Daddy, how did you do it? And that's because of the multiplication table. Similar example in my research was the nakshatras and the planetary positions, whether it's a Mahabharata or Ramayana. And if somebody says, okay, I know my nakshatras, the 27 nakshatras, it's in the book. If I need, I will refer to them in the book. It will not work. It will not work. You will not able to do original research. If you want to do original research, for example, just giving the example of nakshatra, you should be able to visualize them. As a background knowledge, they should be in your mind. You should literally able to go around the ecliptic of the sun or the earth and just go, okay, that star is here, that nakshatra is below, that nakshatra is up above, which side of it is, how many stars, how does it look, how much spaced out it is from other nakshatra, yogatara, and so on. That is when you can start interpretation of these verses and try making sense out of it. Anyways, the point I want to make it is that theory, inference, background knowledge, these are mental processes. On the other hand, if you look at evidence and objective testing, this is something I can show. Like I can send you a list of evidence from Mahabharata text. We are having some discussion going on in my research group, and just I uploaded the file. Here is the evidence. It can be physically done. Same thing with objective testing. Number of you would have seen why Arundhati walks ahead of Vasishtha, when it walks, and so on and so forth. I'm going to take those two, evidence and objective testing, and use them to do this Rashmin viewer, to separate this. Now, to separate what? Trying to solve the same problem, multiple people may come up with multiple solutions. Just as an example, I may talk about the date for Mahabharata, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be anything. Just like coronavirus right now, there could be many ways to deal with it. Okay, so everyone may have their own method. They might have made a contribution. How do we analyze their effectiveness? Where do they fall? And so on. Here is just I'm using back to scientific investigation, evidence and objective testing. And some of you might have seen this. I call it grain and chaff metrics. Okay, so now we are into this what? So viewer, Rashmin viewer, like spread your rays. That's what we are praying, there. So it starts as a 3-step process, no matter what you are working on. Okay, if you are building a framework, it's a 3-step process. The first is a definition, the second one is a separation, and third one is a resolution, unification. Rashmin Vyuha, Rashmin Samuha. Okay, so you define it, you separate it, and then you start bringing them together. You may be successful, you may not be successful, but try to resolve the conflicts and try to unify if possible. Okay, now you may not able to unify the views, but you may able to unify the evidence for your investigation or your theory. So we start with the definition here. So remember, I used 2 points out of the scientific method: evidence and objective testing. And number of you might have seen this, but I want you to give a understanding that I just didn't start randomly with the 2 things. There was this background, how I arrived at this. So if you take the evidence and turn it into a vertical axis, it can go from some evidence to all the relevant evidence, arbitrary or selective evidence to all relevant evidence. If you take the other factor, objective testability, as a x-axis, if you can objectively test, then its answer is yes, therefore it's scientific. If you cannot test, it's metaphysical, atarkya. What this allowed you to do, that if you want to, if there are multiple solutions, claimed solutions, Raju Malhotraji calls truth claims. I like that. Truth claims, if there are multiple truth claims, how do we classify them so that we can understand where do they stand? Okay, so if this particular 2 axes, it created 4 quadrants, and essentially they can be described with this Chatushkoti logic, both true and false in that top left-hand corner, only true in the top right-hand corner, neither true nor false in the bottom left-hand corner, and false in the bottom right-hand corner. Okay, I'll not elaborate on this. It's there in many of my other presentations, but want to give you Upanishadic or Darshana or Purana perspectives with respect to this. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So I'm going to have this exactly same framework here. Okay, now I'm going to give names. Remember, I said definition. We have to define it. I define the first time by Chatushkoti logic, true and false, neither true nor false, true and false. Now I'm saying, how can I define it? In marketing, we give them names, right? A specific buying group, we will call by certain names, and we understand who are we dealing with, the type of customer, whatnot. It's not any different. So this one is like somebody who is not interested in objectively testing anything, but wants to preserve everything, all relevant evidence, doesn't matter if it conflicts with each other or not. That's a preservation of tradition. Very virtuous activity. Then the person who is interested in taking all the evidence and scientifically, objectively testing all of it, my name is, that's dharmic assertion, and make a claim, that's a dharmic assertion. Now this is a very tough category here, guys, at the bottom. The person is not interested in doing anything in objective fashion, and person is not interested in preserving the whole information. In fact, most cases they will use something, it's like finding faults, and to use that one limited, arbitrary, selective information to say how the rest of the things therefore doesn't matter, how it is useless, and so on. Okay, a very wicked activity, I would say, tamasic skepticism. Okay, and the third one is I call it superficial and manipulative claims, where they have one good element, that they do understand what scientific objective testing is, but unfortunately they don't understand that they must consider all the evidence. They stick to arbitrary selective evidence, and we have lots of fun with that. Now what do we do with this? Now this is how we would give this name to the output of claims, the output of truth claims, output of solutions. What if you have to refer to the individuals? Okay, because we do need to refer to individuals, and this simply tells you where they are good, so the top 2, for example, I'll go back for a second. They are good on the evidence because they are considering all the evidence. Okay, but the bottom ones are not. Now on the second aspect of testability, the desired one is that it is testable. So the left side is not a desirable situation as far as the testability is concerned, but the right side is. Okay, that's what those arrows are pointing to. All right, now if it refers to a person, we will call it a preserver of tradition, a dharmic asserter, tamasic skeptic, superficial manipulators, and so on. Okay, now we want to, we gave a definition, now we want to understand the separation of this. Okay, I'm going to use this, this comes in I was looking for a source. Where does exactly the original verse comes? I was told it comes into Chanakya, but I'm also told it comes into Agni Puran and Matsya Puran, and I have to go and look at the original references. However, all of you would have heard this: Sama, Dama, Dandabhed, or Sama, Dana, Dandabhed. So if you're dealing with a preserver of tradition, somebody who is meticulously collecting things, remembering things, copying things, making it available, publishing it, making it available in the library, if you can approach that person and the person have it by heart, there are many individuals, some of them may be on the call, that I approach them when I need help, and they just know from the top of their head. They know the verses, they know the translation, they help me in many different ways. So Sama is what? You want to build association, you want to build association with such individuals, okay? For a right reason, for your selfish reasons too. The dharmic assertor, what do you want to do? You want to do dana. I mean, of course, you want to support their efforts in whichever way you can. Dama also means money, but it also means a garland, reward them, encourage them, and so on and so forth. What do you do with a tamasic skeptic? I won't go into the details, but it's a wicked activity, and you have to curb it in the best way possible. Okay, some kind of punishment. Now, punishment I'm using in a very generic sense. Okay, and we'll talk about the specific danda that or the attitude that you should have towards this group. Again, described in the Puranas, described in the Darshanas, and so on. We are going to look at that. And superficial manipulators, Bheda, you want to show what is different. Okay, why that is not a virtuous activity. Okay, they have some element of it which is good, but in the end, it's a destructive in nature. In fact, below that line of testability, bottom, whether tamasic skeptic or superficial manipulators, they have a purpose, and we will talk about that when we talk about resolution. Just the next slide, I think, or a couple slides after this. When we talk of resolution, we'll see what can be done. But by themselves, the way the activities are conducted, they are very destructive. And again, just my limited experience of last 10 years, I have seen there is so much transitioning, you can say border crossing. If you look at the bottom, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but border crossing from tamasic skeptic to superficial manipulator to tamasic skeptic happens with a drop of a hat. And the person who doing it may not even realize that he or she is doing it. Okay. All right. So how to deal with this? So we understood Samadama Dandabhed, Samadana Dandabhed. That is one way of dealing with it. If you look at Patanjali Yoga Sutra, now Patanjali is saying this. Remember the objective of a Yoga Darshana, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, to bring your mind in sync, in control, right? So it is for your benefit. But in a practical sense, it's very, very useful for all of us, whether you are doing a yoga and meditation or not. It says, it is from Samadhipad, the first portion, 33. Maitri Karuna Mudito Pekshanam Sukha Dukkha Punya Apunya Vishayanam Bhavanats Chitta Prasadanam. That knowing the Brahmadhyan, and one of the proof in the pudding is that your chitta is prasad, you are prasanna. Your attitude is of a prasanna. You are not perturbed by all these things going on around you. In spite of them, you are prasanna. So it is giving 4 aspects, and it is telling for what purposes. So let's begin with that sukha dukkha punya apunya. Sukha, which is what? A good activity, just a simple one, a good thing, a happy thing. That kind of outcome, that kind of activity. Dukkha, a bad outcome, a tragic outcome. Okay. Punya is what? Again, you can say good, a virtuous, okay, useful, right? A useful, fruitful kind of outcome. That is a punya activity, that kind of activity, that kind of outcome. And apunya is again a bad one. Just for simplicity, I'm using the word good and bad, or a wicked activity, a destructive activity. Okay, a destructive outcome, a wicked outcome. Okay, that's apunya. Now, when you see this as an outcome of somebody's effort, how do you deal with it? Well, Bhagwan Patanjali says, by Maitri Karuna Mudito Pekshanam. And why do you do that? To keep your prasannata, to maintain your prasannata. So, for example, if you see a pleasing efforts, if you see virtuous efforts, do friendship with that person. Okay, Maitri. I'm just again using a simple translation as a friendship. Okay, association. If you see a unpleasing activities, undesired activities, it's very natural to get angry, frustrated, and that's fine, but it only hurts you. So you can have a karuna, sympathy towards that person or towards that outcome. It could be individual or it could be the effort towards that outcome or towards that person. And then if it is punya, a virtuous activity, mudita, mudita means what? Happiness, joy, feeling joyful. Those of you who know the sweet dish, I think it's around India, but Marathi dish modak, and I'm sure it's other places too. That modak comes from mudita, joyful. That's something that brings utter joy to you. Modak is my favorite dish, by the way, made with rice flour, not the fried modak, but the baked modak. Anyways, that's a digression. And so does Ganesh, likes them too, by the way. So that's mudita. And the last one, the apunya, which is undesired, a wicked, a destructive activity or destructive outcome. What do you do? Upeksha. Show indifference to that outcome. Show indifference to that individual. And now we will also talk about what else can be done. Before I do that, I want to show you what a Purana has to say. Again, I'm going to pull something from Bhagavad Puran. The point I'm making is, again, this was my assumption, that may not be your assumption, but I was thinking, okay, Darshana is like a totally different field, and then there is a Veda, and then there is a Mahabharata, there is a Ramayana, and then there is these Puranas. Well, that's all true. They have slightly different purpose. The emphasis is different. But if you start studying, which is that brahmacharya, study, contemplation, swadhyaya, so if you start self-study, it's amazing how much they become supportive to each other. Okay, they become like, nourishing. They nourish each other. Some element that might be missed in a very dry discussion of Patanjali Yoga Sutra might be supported by say Purana. So I'm going to pull something from Bhagavad Puran. This is from the 11th canto, and it is describing the Madhyam Bhakti. I'll not go into that. That could be a separate talk. But Ishware tad adhineshu bali sheshu dushatsucha prema maitri krupopeksha yah karoti samadhyama. He says, if you are, sort of dealing with Ishwar. Now, I'm not saying that Ishwar is same as here, the preserver of tradition. And that's also the point I want to emphasize. See, it could be the same framework, but it could be used in multiple places. For example, the framework that is used for yoga or the framework that is used for Nyaya can be used in science, that can be used in how you do agriculture, that can be used in how you make a dosa, that can be used in a business, that can be used in marketing to slice and dice the data. It's the same thing. So here, how to keep your mind in a balanced way, Patanjali is giving you some input. Now, the similar framework is being used by Bhagavad to describe a Madhyam type of bhakta. He says, Ishware tad adhineshu bali sheshu dvishatsucha prema maitri krupopeksha yakaroti samadhyama. So Ishwar, so four people there. Ishwar, tad adhineshu meaning bhakta of Ishwar. Bali sheshu, which means what? A person of a lower intelligence, mudajan, a dull intellect, person of a dull intellect. And dvishatsu, like an enemy, person who always has enmity towards others, or at least enmity towards you. How do you deal with them? And it says exactly the same way. Okay, the only a couple of words I'm going to add, the mudita, like a joy feels, you should feel joyful. It says you should feel affection, love towards that person, the preserver of tradition, or in this case, it refers to Ishwar, towards Bhagwan, you should feel prem. Tad adhineshu, with the bhakta of a Bhagwan, you should develop friendship. And the person who is balisheshu, of a dull intellect, what you should do? Krupa, similar to karuna, be sympathetic, okay, be forgiving. That's what it says. And upeksha, again for the last one, for dvishatsu, your enemy, just be indifferent. Okay, upeksha. So the point I'm saying is the similarity of it, but also the differences. Okay, all right. Now, how do we, once we define it, once we separated those, we understand, how do we bring them together, the resolution and or unification? Okay, So again, I'm going to pull something from Patanjali Yoga Sutra. I'll show you in a second. So Shraddha plus Pradnya plus Virya is equal to Satya. And a quick translation, Shraddha means reverence. And therefore, that can give you the determination, the perseverance to work on this, because that Shraddha, even when you don't get the solution, again, my quick example of Arundhati Vasishtha, and there are many others, but I just stick to Arundhati Vasishtha. It took me 15 years. And, I was called nuts. And I was called all sorts of names, stay away from this crazy guy, but that reverence, that I'm saying, why would Vyas write otherwise, and I could have been wrong for all it mattered, because, all our ancient narratives also has many errors sometimes, that have crept in, interpolation and changing of words and here and there. But I had this Shraddha that it is a very clear statement, clear meaning. I don't see why Vyas would write that. There has to be a reason, and I went on. So that Shraddha helps you in that fashion. But Shraddha is the beginning, okay, guys? Shraddha is the beginning. Shraddha is not the end. You read somewhere, therefore that's enough for me. No, that's a very tamasi attitude. Then Pradnya, which is intellect, and then the courage, heroic deeds, tapasya, and it takes you to the truth. So again, looking at these 4 quadrants. So someone who is into that Shraddha quadrant, in a very religious, meticulous fashion, preserving the thing, and that's a good thing, and he or she could be very happy there. But if you want to move them towards that, actually perceiving the truth, what can you say? You say, hey, you have a great knowledge, great stock. My God, I wish I had this. Now, if you like to learn a scientific method, it's essentially common sense. It's not complicated, and see if you can, the knowledge that you have, if it can be put to an objective test. Wow, what a great thing that will be. That is the way you may able to move that person to the top right hand corner. And here the assumption I'm making in the context of scientific investigation, that the goal is to get into the top right hand corner. So that's how you may do it to that person. Here pradnya is required everywhere, but if that person is there, you say, okay, do more. Okay, or can you be devil's advocate and question your own theory, question your own truth claim, and see if you can improve, if you can refine. The bottom left-hand corner, we talked about tamasic skeptic. The samshay we are talking here is samshay of the mind, okay? And it's not the samshay of the buddhi. The samshay that we saw, the word in Nyaya Darshana, that is samshay of the buddhi, like devil's advocate. That's a good one. This one is not a devil's advocate. This person doesn't trust anyone. This person doesn't trust anything. Only he or she trusts themselves. Okay, and their whatever the thing they have come to, and they are so prone to make these claims for which there is no evidence. If I have to take again Patanjali for a second, let me show you Patanjali's statement first. This is Samadhi Part 20. Shraddha Virya Smriti Samadhi Pradnya Purvaka Itaresham. Okay, but if you look at the top right hand corner, that is the way to get to the truth. Patanjali says, Pratyaksha Anumana Agama Pramanani. That's the top right-hand corner. If you come to the bottom right-hand corner, it is the next sutra in Samadhi Path, 7, 8, and 9. So the 8 says, Viparyayo Mithya Jnanam Atadrupa Pratishtham. If you don't follow this scientific method, it will definitely lead you to Mithya Jnana. Okay? And then the bottom left-hand corner, see how beautiful this is. This sutra number 9, in a sequence, 7, 8, and 9, and it says Shabda Jnananupati Vastu Shunyo Vikalpa. You are making a claim for which you have no evidence. What can we do? We don't know whether it's true. We don't know if it's a false, neither true nor false. Okay, it's a wasteful activity. Okay, now what do we do to that? These two people, the below the line, below the horizontal line, we can tell this tamasic skeptic, assuming she is willing to change that tamasic, meaning willing to do tapasya. Okay, we say skepticism is good. That's a good part. Okay, the samshay is good, but don't stick with the samshay of a mind. Turn that into the samshay of a buddhi. Like why this might be there. So, for example, people are stuck in a what do you call the Pushpak Viman. They don't see the engine, so therefore they say it doesn't exist. Therefore, Ramayana is also has no meaning. It's just a story. He says, well, okay, but what if, just for a minute, assume that what if the Pushpak Viman is true? what technology they might have used. Can you investigate? Now it becomes a very fruitful problem. You may succeed, you may not succeed, but you will have a heck of a ride. Okay, on your deathbed, you'll be very happy. You did something in life, whether you found the solution or not. So that is the way to take that person to up there. Then the second aspect, where he or she makes lots of theories but no evidence, Shabda Jnananupati Vastu Shunya Vikalpa. You say, hey, your ability to build these conjectures, guesses, theories, that's all good. But right now your problem is you imagine something and you think this is true. Now, that's not how science works. Now imagine things, write it down, now look for evidence in support of those, and only then you start discussing that as your truth claim. Okay, so that's how you move that person from the bottom left-hand corner to top right-hand corner. And the person who is into the bottom right-hand bucket, you say, well, you understand what scientific testing is. That's great. Now you must understand why it must be done for all relevant evidence, which means you must need a statement of a theory, and all life would be good. You're capable. You just need some guidance, and that's how you may able to bring that person to the top right-hand corner. Quickly, I may have gone over time, 9:30. I'll just use 2-3 minutes and I'm done. Now, how do you communicate to others? Okay, so this can get a bit technical. Again, we can go to Bhagavad Puran. Again, Bhagavad Puran is seen as a Bhakti Grantha, and yes, it is a Bhakti Grantha. But then, many great saints of India have said this time and again. He said India has a lot of bhakti. Unfortunately, it is very heavy on tamas. Okay, and if I ever talk about the different types of bhakti, I will get to that, but not today. What Bhagavad Puran is referring to, and I'm going to use that words to build another framework, how to communicate this. Okay, so in terms of knowledge, what are you communicating from a very small information or very quick sharp point to a vast knowledge? That's a Vyapti Jnana, the scope and scale. If that's a vertical axis, the horizontal axis goes from a Shraddha to Sakshatkar. Again, think of the framework that I showed you. Atarkya to objectively testable. Okay, I'm using something similar, not identical. Vipul meaning all evidence, and Susandarbha meaning selective. I don't mean exactly that, but the direction is kind of consistent. And that gives you a framework, just from this. Mahad Vimrugyam is something that is worthy of investigation. This is Krishna telling Uddhava. He's saying, okay, now we are Bhakta, now what do you do or something? And Uddhava is asking, what should I do? And he says, Jnanam Vishuddham Vipulam Yatayata. You should go after knowledge, Vishuddha, and a lot of knowledge. Vairagya Vijnana Yutam Puranam, and have to realize for yourself that this is true. Akhyai Vishveshwara Vishwamurte, I'll skip the last 2 lines. And Tvad Bhakti Yogam Cha Mahad Vimrugyam. Through Bhakti and Yoga, you have to learn things that are worthy of learning, worthy of investigation, and from those people who are Mahad Vimrugyam, also those who are knowledgeable. Okay, so this is a framework. Now, just want to show you another verse from Bhagavad Puran to show you that what is demanded in what we call modern science, actually Bhagavad Puran is even demanding more. In science, we'll say explanation, the triangulation of explanation, prediction, testing is enough. Bhagavad is saying it's not enough. It says, Shruti Pratyaksham Aitiyam Anumanam Chatushtayam Pramaneshva Anavasthanat Vikalpat Savirajyate. If you don't do quadrangulation of Shruti, Pratyaksha, Aitiya, and Anuman, it's not, unless you do the quadrangulation of these 4, it's not sufficient. Okay, so where does this fit? Shruti, that's Laksha. Now, if you look at Shruti as a think of a Veda, like a metaphor, not metaphor, like a sutra, it wants to say something in a punchline, as a punchline, like Aham Brahmasmi, for example. We want to give you as a punchline. One short sentence covers a lot. Okay, so we have a Shruti Grantha, and does it match whatever we have found? Does it directionally match with what Shruti is saying? Pratyaksham, through our sense perception, the objective testing, that's the drusha. Everyone can relate to that, if not to Shruti. Aitiya, Smaraniya. So what is the goal of Aitiya? So once we find some wisdom, we have to package it into in such a fashion, like a mnemonic, so that it can be easily remembered. And that's why we have these stories in our Puranas, in Itihasa and Akhyanas and whatnot, right? And then the Anuman is how actually you reach the truth. You can draw the truth and you hope that the other person understands, but it is for every individual person to draw their own inference to come to that final stage of truth, and that's a mental process of Anuman. So that's Satya Pratishthan. So that also fits very well with this. And where I want to end is where I started. I started with this verse from a Mundak Upanishad, Satyena labhyas tapasa yesha atma. Why we do it is to get the Atma Jnana or a Brahma Jnana. How do we do it? Using Satya, Tapasya, Brahmacharya, and Samyak Jnana. And where does that fit? It fits into investigation, but it also fits into communication. So when we have to communicate effectively to other people, and I'm not claiming I'm an effective communicator, but we have to hit these 4 buckets. And usually our ability to communicate to others gets better. So, for example, I told you a story, the story of Bhargavi Varuni Vidya, that will go into Smaraniya, and so on. So let's quickly just to show you that Satya goes into that Anuman, that quadrant there. Tapasya, Aitiya, many stories, that's remembering, forming those stories, creating those stories, remembering, telling them. Storytelling is an art, and I know there are a few individuals who have joined on this call. They are great storytellers. It's an art, and it's a very useful art. And so cultivate that. It takes efforts. It's not easy. Tapasya, then Samyak Jnana. Why Samyak Jnana? Because we can easily cheat ourselves. Okay, even so Arundhati Vasishtha is a good one. I mean, if you go to Twitter, you will see all kinds of crazy things going on, and even some email chains. I mean, I don't know how to get out of those email chains. Finally, I had found a way to mute those. I mean, these some 20-30 Mahabharata researchers are just wasting time, if you ask me. The problem is they cannot understand a simple things like Arundhati Vasishtha, but they will just go into something details which is beyond their comprehension. So Samyak Jnana, the balanced attitude, is required if you want to get into objective testing and everywhere else. And the Brahmacharya, as I said, is what? Study, contemplation, thinking. You need this to understand what Shruti is saying, and you need this when you find a new insight to turn it into a Shruti format, turn that into a sutra, turn that into a compact format so that people can remember it. Okay, and this is, I think, my last slide. Questions, please, no comments, please, and limit your questions to what was being discussed in this presentation. So is that the same one, what you meant when you said that we are stuck in dogmas of Titas?
Yes, yes.
So what is Titas?
Yes, I meant yugas, I think, typo. Smartphone, yeah.
Yugas. And okay. No, so I want to give a very short answer. That a yuga, a concept, just like, we might say some weight, so we have like pounds and we have kilograms and whatnot, or maybe feastful, we can use that as a unit. Similarly, yuga has many definitions, but what has happened somewhere, we don't know when it happened, why it happened, but something that was, say, 432,000, that's a perfect astronomy number. It has a purpose. If anyone reading Surya Siddhanta or Aryabhatiya would know why that number was created. But it is totally misunderstood. Something that was meant for astronomy, we are starting saying that, acha, 432,000 is a one yuga, and twice that is another yuga, and it's as if it's like the day our year ends on 31st December, as if something sharp happens on a specific day. And we, from a history, understanding history or antiquity of our civilization, using that confused understanding of a yuga, we have made a mess out of it. And that's what I call the yuga dogma. And so you can go to my blogs and read about others. In fact, that's a one good, very fruitful problem to work on. Yeah, I mean, we are not going to solve the yuga problem here on the call, but that's the one. Good point. No, I can see that. I mean, if we, I can see that. Satish Chandraji, I can see your question is Saprayojan with purpose. can be good or bad, constructive or destructive? The answer is actually a great point. I mean, whoever said it. Yes, saprayojana, actually that can be a destructive purpose also. Just like think of a fire, Agni. Okay, I mean, Agni can be, or Surya. I mean, it can be used for positive purposes, constructive purposes. It can be used for destructive purposes. Okay, and that's I'll not go there today. And there's, but Rahul, that's something another time in future, whenever we can think of, like the foundation of a Hindu Dharma, like the Trinity of Hindu Dharma. We can talk about. So that is where this Niti Dharma. The Niti, the foundation of a Niti Dharma, based on, so we assume that the foundation of Niti Dharma is there, but otherwise not otherwise, the question is great, that the saprayojana can be for a destructive purpose. Absolutely.
I just want to ask, how do Adhyatmics think of your work? How do they react?
Okay, great question. The great question, because there is a huge problem to figure out who is Adhyatmic, I mean, if you can say, if the question is, what do academics think of my work? Or what do, other Mahabharata researchers think of my work? It's easy to answer. Adhyatmics, I mean, I consider myself Adhyatmic, and I think great of my own work. Right? So, but you may be asking if by Adhyatmic you mean from a religious side, is that what you mean, Nitinji? So if I mean, we want to figure out who is Adhyatmic. I mean, that's kind of a challenge. But as a general answer, as a overall response, I would say from a Hindu community, if I can use that word, it's very positive, overwhelmingly positive. Many will tell me that they're reading the book and they find it very hard and technical, and that is true. And then, I give them some suggestions as to what they can do and so on, and how they can participate. But overwhelmingly positive. That's what I will say. And, there has to be, Nitinji, I mean, you will understand, the Marathi saying, Durjanache ghar asave shezari. So that's very useful. But overwhelmingly, it's a very positive response. The trick is to get this to everyone. See, I'm a very small person. I'll tell you, like number of everyone almost on the call here would agree with me that Rajiv Malhotra ji had done tremendous work and, has a tremendous reach and so on. In spite of that, I will tell you, I go to, I mean, this is Atlanta here where I live, and people are educated. Everyone that I know, minimum 2 or 3 degrees. I mean, degree is not indication of anything. That's the point I think I'm trying to make maybe. But when I ask them, just in some context, and they will say some subject comes and I want to suggest that they should read Being Different, for example. And I'll say, have you heard of Rajiv Malhotra? And time again, I will hear a total blank on their face. So my point is, those people who actually are aware of my work, and I will say same thing for Rajiv Malhotra ji, and many others, those who are working, they're fascinated. So its response is very good. Now our job, and by our job, it's not my job, I'm doing it in my way, is for all of us, is to how we reach people who don't know. And one of the, I mean, I worked in sales and marketing all my life. The sales principle or marketing principle, I did not work in marketing, but one of the marketing rule I have heard time and again is that unless you tell the same person same thing 20 times separated by time, it doesn't even register on their brain. So they might have heard Nilesh Oak or Rajiv Malhotra or whatever multiple times and it would not register. So don't think like I already told this guy. You have to tell it multiple times. So that was a bit digression, but anyways, we'll get to the next question. So Nitinji, that was my answer. So the response is very good.
I am asking Nilesh, hi Nilesh sir, I am asking regarding the, like I am ML researcher and I found your exact analogy in what I am reading right now. So I also put up a question there that can we classify Hindu sects or our, like we have just 6 sampradayas here, or you can also say the 4 varnas here. So can we classify those 4 or 6 in the same 4 classifications?
Yeah, I mean, yes, see, I mean, whether it works successfully or not, I mean, that only you can tell. And the frameworks that I'm sharing with you, the classification, it's not like one time I did it and it happened. You can relate to that very well, right? They evolved over time. I said, okay, this doesn't fit very well. Maybe I can use this word there and that makes more sense. Then you experiment with it and you say, no, I need to fine tune. But the answer to your question, in fact, I see there low bias and variance and high bias and low variance as a machine learning thing. Absolutely, you can use those classification and see how it falls. In fact, what that does, like Krishna says, did you mention like using it to our Varna system? Did you say that? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So when I said about the Varna system, we can classify them as the Satya as the Brahmans, Tapasyas to the Kshatriyas, and Samyak Gyan to the Vaishyas, and Brahmacharya to the Shudras.
No, great. I mean, hey, you wrote your generic name as India. That's fine. But no, absolutely. I mean, do that and put your name to it. I mean, it may take some evolution, might need some work. But Samyak Gyan, and I'm saying Vaishya. But you are right. I mean, if you go to Mahabharata and the story of a Tuladar Vaishya, he's holding the balance, right? He's not making distinction whether he's weighing potatoes or tomatoes or whatnot, zucchini.
And similarly, the Kshatriyas, he has a high bias. He has a high bias in saving our country. So whatever is saving for a country, he will do his best. But he has the only priority is to save the country. Like his bias is the country.
Right. So the fair point. So I mean, work on this, and I think we need people like you, who experiment with this. That's a great question, great comment, and don't leave it at this. Like, okay, some interesting discussion. No, I mean, take it to the next level.
I am reading Gita right now. So in Gita, I found this whole bias and variance topic in my point of view.
Absolutely, it is there. Yeah, I mean the Chaturvarne Maya Srishtam Gunakarma Vibhagasha, and then you go to 18th chapter.
Yeah, so but I just seen in Gita that there is man as bias and variance as a buddhi.
Yeah. No, I mean, let's not. I didn't get your name. Let's not get into the discussion here, so that we can go to the next question.
Hi, Nilesh. Essentially, what I see is that generally the background information works in two ways. It could be our dogmatic, fixation to ideas, and it could be ideas which lead to new and better ideas from background information. So how do we ensure that more innovative ideas, more anumanas happen out of this framework? How we can incorporate that kind of movement in this framework?
Okay, I mean, I don't have I don't have a magical answer other than what Mundak Upanishad has given. Satyena labhyas tapasa yesha atma samyak jnanena brahmacharyena nityam. I mean, tapasya. See, what people, I would say tapasya is the most important point. Not that the others don't matter. But I'm saying they must be given. But even when person is genuinely looking for a satya, might have a samyak jnan. Okay. And, the study and tapasya will come together. So, yes, the person has a scientific attitude, the Indian word, whatever used in the constitution, temperament or something. And, you read the articles written by some of these folks and I don't think they have a scientific temperament, But anyways, that's a sidebar. But tapasya and then study and contemplation and thinking, but forget contemplation and thinking for a minute, but tapasya and study, it is lacking. People just think it's a plug and play. That's the challenge. So I don't have a solution to that, but the answer is satyena labhyas tapasa yesha atma samyak jnanena brahmacharyena nityam. People just like that Bhrigu, I told that Bhrigu Varuni Vidya story for a reason. It's not, I mean, the story doesn't tell you how long it took Bhrigu to come to the realization Annam Brahmeti Vejana, and only to realize that is just a one step. There is higher realization and so on. So that the framework exists, the method exists. There has to be a wish, there has to be a willingness. Okay, so Abhitosh, always a pleasure, of course, to discuss and do that.
Namaste, Nilesh ji.
Namaste.
Really enjoyed your talk. I was wanting to ask you that there are so many Upanishads and so many Puranas.
Yeah.
How would you structure it for children of various ages until the youth?
Yeah.
What are the specific sections of each Puranas or Upanishads you would recommend?
Okay. I mean, a great question, and it's very much at my heart and at the heart of many people. I know there are few individuals on the call. I hope they are there. I won't name their names, but they have shown, at least they have expressed their wish to work, and to work, not necessarily work with me, but they don't have to work with me. They can work on their own, which is so the point that you mentioned, like how to take it to children, or which portion. First thing is, we need to write for children, and we don't need to do this as a separate exercise, because those books can be read by adults. Okay, just to give a simple example, if how many of us here on the call, for example, knows exactly how the nuclear plant works? Not many. Okay, I mean, I happen to know, I have been to nuclear plants, but still it's very complicated. But if someone wants to know how nuclear plant works, in America at least, and I'm sure that's true in India, if you go to a public library, or here the libraries are well made, and they have a children's section. And if I want to find something about some new subject that I don't know anything about, I actually go to children's section and find a book like biology for children, or nuclear plant for children, and I actually find what I want to know. That's the basic stage. So to make a short answer, we need to write books for children. Now we need to be very careful with this, and I'll mention the name. Personally, I have looked briefly into that work, but many of our people are so naive that just like what is this guy's name, Devdutt Patnaik, we'll take his books and people think, oh, that's a nice good stuff. What nonsense, right? But we are so naive. I mean, he does good sketches. I'm not putting everything in the bad bracket, but only good sketches. Afterwards, it's a utter nonsense, and it's a very destructive for our civilization what he writes. Similarly, there is another person which many people don't think it is so. There is a person named Rupa Pai, and she's writing a series of books, calling, I forgot the names, but Upanishad for children, Gita for children, and so on. Okay. Now, I'm not saying there may not be good stuff in it, but the little that I have read, okay, it's again in a very similar way the Raju Mundarji talks about, removed of the essence, the essence is taken, the grains are taken, and the chaff is being distributed as if that's a Bhagavad Gita or that's Upanishad. So, it's a freedom for everyone. She can do whatever she wants. But instead of we very naively and foolishly thinking that's a great work, we meaning the people who are committed to Dharma, need to create these works.
If there are 3 Upanishads you would choose for the youth, what would it be?
Okay, so I mean, but I'll tell you mine, but you ask somebody else, they will have a different set of Upanishad and so on. Okay, so for me, it will be Bhagavad Gita. Don't forget that Bhagavad Gita is a Upanishad. Then Ishopanishad and Brihadaranyaka Upanishad.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
Yeah. So I had this question regarding the people who believe that the Vedas are apaurushaya. So probably in your classification, they would be standing in the left top column, right? The preservers of knowledge.
Yes.
So what is basically your take on in the 4 framework, like the dharmic? I don't remember exactly the names.
Yeah, I got
they
it.
are the preservers
Okay.
of knowledge. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your take on that?
Okay.
Regarding the Apaurushayatva of Veda, since you have worked on, or you are working on Rig Veda right now.
Yes. No, I understood the question. Thank you. So 2 aspects. One is, in my first framework, the preserver of tradition. That's correct. That is where the Veda would go, or any all ancient Indian narratives would go there. So that goes there. Now the second framework that I showed, so what is that? Shruti, Pratyaksham, Aitiyam, Anumanam, Chatushtayam. It will go into Shruti, the bottom left-hand corner there. Okay. Apaurushaya. See, again, just like that Yuga dogma, we take one particular definition of Apaurushaya. By we, I don't mean you or me. Any one of us at any point. We think, oh, but Apaurushaya is that, and I agree with it, or I don't agree with it. Or they will say, if Apaurushaya means that, then how can you do this, and so on. One should look at the Shat Darshanas and how each of that Darshana looks at Apaurushayatva of Vedas. Okay, so instead of me giving a long answer, so Aparushayatva meaning there is no author to it. That is a one position, but that is not the only position, and it's not something that you have to necessarily stick with it. If it helps you, I mean, if it convinces you, your subjective conviction, go ahead. If it's useful, at the end of the day, proof is in the pudding. That's what it is. But if you look at the Nyaya Vaisheshika position, or just a Nyaya position of Aparushayatva, it's very different. What I will suggest, and I'm not erudite enough to explain that, but there is on YouTube, just very recently I posted it, there is a talk by Professor Ujjwala Jha. She's she's based in Pune, by the way, Professor Ujjwala Jha. And Vasishtha Narayan Jha, Professor Vasishtha Narayan Jha, the couple, so she gave a talk on the Aparushayatva of a Veda from a Vaisheshika Nyaya perspective. If you just type Professor Ujjwala Jha, you will get that talk. It's a wonderful talk, on that one. So to summarize, there is no one particular definition of it. Just like Yuga, somebody telling you 432,000 Kali Yuga is the only definition, is the person hasn't even started studying. It's a tamas of a highest kind. It's the same thing for Aparushaya, just taking one definition and thinking about it. So I don't know if that helps the answer, but so yeah, I'll not go into the answer. Listen to that talk, and we can of course always talk offline.
So it was such a great talk. It was very informative. Thank you so much. So one question about that calendar thing, actually, if you can tell us a bit more about the calendar, that sounds really intriguing. And the second thing was just a comment. I actually found about this talk from Reddit. And we are a bunch of guys out there. We are big fans of your work, and also we wanted to request you to come do an AMA on a forum on Reddit once, so we can discuss your book and general Hindu, all Indology and all those things. That would be great. If you can consider it, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. So two points there. So Rajivji, where are you based?
So I am based in Bangalore.
Okay. So me coming to your small group is through like a Skype or Zoom or something. Is that the idea?
Oh no. This is Reddit. It is something. It's a social media type of a site. It's all online.
Okay. Yeah. So no. I mean, and thank you for the invitation. Usually, what happens, just because of my time constraints, what I do is, I mean, there are so many people like come to my forum or this. I mean, I don't do it, but just coming like a one time or something, I mean, that's something, if we want to do it, it can be done. The calendar one, again, just like that Yuga dogma, we get so emotional. I mean, I'm controlling my sales language and try to remain pleasant. What happens is just like the Yuga dogma, we also get into calendar. Like, why I'm frustrated, because I get these questions all the time. Like people will say Nilesh or Nilesh G, they sometimes might add G. Why are you using this Gregorian calendar, or why not say that in an Indian calendar? And again, I mean, you're not asking that. I'm just using your question as a preamble to vent. So what happens is I will tell them, so give me the other calendar, and then they disappear. Now this is extremely destructive, useless, tamasic attitude, tamasic suggestion. I mean, when they do that, like, why not use an Indian calendar? And that's the context I was coming at, which is to say, we have a functional Gregorian calendar right now, and for all practical, the vyavahar, it is working fine. There are many benefits to using a nicer natural calendar. See, the Gregorian calendar has a natural basis. Okay, what is the natural basis? It's a solar calendar. In a way, it's a purely solar calendar, and to that extent, it is useful. Okay, that extent, it is also easy to use. So let's appreciate what is there in the Gregorian calendar. Unless you appreciate what is there in the Gregorian calendar, no one can dare to make a Indian lunisolar calendar that is functional, superior to Gregorian calendar, but as easy to use as Gregorian calendar. It is a monumental task. It's a huge task. So I'm saying that is something that somebody can consider doing it, just like I worked on Mahabharata, Ramayana or something. But when I mentioned this, not you, I did it the other day on Twitter, I think, and then somebody said, "Well, Nileshji should work on the lunisolar calendar now." Well, in a way, in parallel, I'm working for 20 plus years. But there is only so much hours in the day, and all those challenges. So what I was referring to the calendar is just like solving this whole nonsense that has sprouted around this whole concept of a yuga. It needs to be cleared up. That's a huge problem to solve. It's a saprayojana. It's a very fruitful problem to solve. Okay. And the sandigdha, the doubts of peoples are real. I mean, they have been brainwashed for so long, and the brainwashing continues, unfortunately. There are dogmatic people who want to continue to hang on to this yuga dogma. So it's a big problem to solve. Similarly, the calendar. If we can, you might have seen some recent talks on YouTube. I mean, they're always going on to create an Indian calendar. In the Constitution also, there was a discussion of it. The Constitution said, I don't want to go into that discussion. I don't know this knowledge firsthand, that the Vikram Samvat was the calendar. And even, this was a interview I saw between Madhu Kishwarji and Kulashreshtaji, that they were discussing, and Kulashreshtaji was saying that was the idea, that actually the Vikram Samvat calendar was the main, the Tithi would be bigger, and then the English date would be smaller, and so on and so forth. My point is, I mean, that's great. And some people are actually making these calendars. I think we need to, this is an opportunity, if you want to modify, change it, to add certain elements into it for taking into account the changes that we need to do if we want to truly make it a lunisolar calendar. So for example, we consider Ashwini as the first nakshatra. Well, that was true 2000 years ago. We need to change that. But not only we change it to what it is today, but we almost have a somewhere note that says another 400 years from now, or another 800 years from now, we need to know this. Or 300 years from now, we need to make this correction, and so on and so forth. Anyways, I went longer on that one, but that was my idea. Again, it's not a one-man thing, or it can be a one-man thing, but for that person, that would be his or her only project.